Thanks, Vaibhav. Can you confirm that you can see my PowerPoint deck?
I can see that, and the recording has also started. Over to you, Tim.
Outstanding. Thanks very much, Vaibhav. Hi, everybody. So glad to be with you. This is called Azure Cognitive Services Quick Start. And my name's Tim Warner. I work full-time for Pluralsight. I do mostly Azure stuff. Actually, over the last 3, 4, 5 years, it's been almost 100% Azure, with occasional forays into AWS or Google Cloud. I also do some cloud architecture work on the side. And it's interesting that it's probably because I'm a teacher, the solutions architecture engagements that I do wind up being ask me anything kind of more than anything else, knowledge transfer, because that's my particular wheelhouse. All right, so what have I prepared for you for the next hour? It'll go like this. We'll look at some foundational terminology, making sure we understand AI, ML, REST APIs, that kind of stuff. And my point there is just to be as complete of a presenter as possible. I'm assuming no previous experience with any of this. If you already know the stuff, if you would, I'm not trying to insult anybody's intelligence, just let it fly by, and hopefully we'll get to some new stuff for you. My goal is to introduce you to cognitive services so that you have a good picture of what it's used for, what its value propositions are, and then, of course, just as importantly, how to get productive with it quickly. And I'm confident by the end of the hour, you'll be there. Okay, I like to teach and demo, and I will demo the cognitive services using the REST API directly, because let's face it, anything that you use on top of the REST API is just an abstraction. So when I teach this material, I find that if you know how to call the REST APIs at the ground floor, then you're fine when you're using your libraries, your software development kits, and that kind of stuff. All right, session materials. This is pretty important. If you want to grab a copy of the slide deck and also the sample files, the test files that I'm using as we go along here, go to timw.info/cog1, timw.info/cog1. And what it is, it's about 28 megabytes or so. It's the deck. I don't think I made a PDF. I think it's actually a PowerPoint deck. And then there's a couple other folders with some useful websites that I think might save you some Googling. And also, like I said, some test files, image files, scanned receipts, OCR test images, stuff that can, allow you to get some bang for your buck really quickly with COG services. So we won't spend a lot of time on the foundational terminology, but let's just run through this briefly. AI, as you can see on the left hand of the slide, any technique that enables computers to mimic human intelligence. So it's a field of study. It's the superset, whereas ML, in my understanding, is a subset of AI that refers to a particular technique to teach a piece of software, a compute system, to make decisions based on its previous experience. And the way I like to rationalize AI from a top-level view is when you think about us as human beings using our senses, sight, if we're fortunate enough to have most or all of our senses, sight and smell and hearing and touch, and then taking in new unfamiliar input through those sensors, processing it through our catalog of past history and past memories and identifying patterns in this new input, and then making a prediction, a conclusion from there. It's really the same kind of metaphor applied here to computer and software systems. So ML, as I mentioned, is the most common way to do artificial intelligence. And some of the buzzword explanations or definitions you normally see are things like you're programming the computer to improve on its own without being, without explicitly programming every step like you would say in a JavaScript application. You're letting the system learn in either a supervised or an unsupervised way. Okay, a machine learning model is typically the deliverable. You combine, let me see if I can bring my drawing tools out here. I'm on my home computer, which is a Mac, so I'm pretty clumsy. I'm much better on Windows. But let me see here if I can get my, yeah, it worked, good. So a model, as I said, is the deliverable, and the idea is that you've got some business problem that you want to solve with artificial intelligence. Maybe you're a car dealership and you want to be able to make predictions or help your agents when they accept a trade-in, come up with a good number without necessarily having to go to the blue book and that kind of stuff. Just thinking of these off the top of my head. So what we have here is data, and that's another whole subset of ML, making sure that your data is as free from bias as possible. It's got extraneous noise removed. We've got data, and the more the better. The more that the data is pruned and cleaned, the better. There's terms like feature selection and feature engineering that come in here. And we're combining that data. Normally we'll split it into training and test sets, where you train the model on, say, 70% of your data and withhold the other percentage to verify that the model is giving accurate predictions. The smoke and mirrors, in a sense, there's no magic going on. Training a machine learning model is simply running that data against various algorithms, mathematical formulas, specifically statistical functions. There's really no magic in it. But because we've got a lot of parallel compute under the hood, especially when you're doing ML in the cloud like in Azure, you can overcome the limitations of human beings trying to combine all these variables with all these really crazy PhD level formulas that are far beyond my pay grade. So that's the work that goes into, or at least from a top line, trying to solve a problem yourself with machine learning. Now, to contrast that with cognitive services, I think you're going to find that Cog Services can save you right out of the gate a huge amount of work, because you're going to see that these cognitive services are pre-done, pre-baked cookies. They're pre-done ML algorithms that Microsoft has spent years refining and training and retraining. And, so you can just start to tap into them without having to reinvent the wheel and run through that model training and deployment and hosting all by yourself. You might know that Azure Resource Manager is a fabric of REST APIs. We're going to see that all the cognitive services are exposed from Azure as REST APIs. And just, again, to cross this conceptual bridge, quick deal on API, or an application programming interface. I like to define it as a programmatic way to do create, read, update, and delete operations. Programmatically meaning, not necessarily shepherded click by a user. It's just request response cycle in a client server way. What's the great beauty of the REST API model? Well, that we're using the hypertext transfer protocol. We're going away from proprietary walled garden kind of stuff. And the promise of the REST API is that it's pretty ubiquitous, because what system nowadays doesn't support HTTP? So we have the client forming a request. One of the many constraints of a REST API is that every HTTP request should be stateless and include everything that the server needs to be able to process that request. You might include payload data that's in JSON. That's a common format that we'll see with Cog Services. We also could attach binary files. We're using existing HTTP methods, get, post, put, patch, delete, to do create, read, update, delete operations against the server's exposed API. The server is then going to form a response, again, using the same vendor-neutral, firewall-friendly mechanism. It's a beautiful thing. I'm a huge fanboy of REST API architecture. Okay, so getting that out of the way, let's get now into the fun stuff here. First, let's review a couple slides, just giving us a top-level introduction to Cog Services. Then I promise the rest will be in demo. By the way, I'd hate to have you hold on to your questions until the very end, so please don't hesitate to interrupt me, even if I'm mid-speech. It doesn't matter. I'd rather have you surface your questions sooner rather than later. Okay, so keep that in mind. All right, so I've taken a couple screen captures from the Cognitive Services website to save us some time. You can see that they're divided into 4 top-level categories that kind of correspond to human sensory input, right? Decision, language, speech, and vision. We don't need to go through every one of these one by one, but let me see. On the decision side, anomaly detector, you can see that directly in Azure, for example, with Azure Advisor and Azure Security Center. In other words, looking at the pattern of your signal, whatever your data signal is, and helping you to be proactive about spotting deviations. Content moderator is what you might think if you've ever submitted to a blog and had your comment held for moderation. But this service allows you and your team to work collaboratively to dispose or to tag three types of media: text, photos, and videos. Okay, let's see. In the language category, what do I want to call out there? Well, text analytics is pretty cool because you can take text input, whatever form that might be. Actually, it could be OCR'd off of an image of a billboard or a sign. It could be, anything really. But the bottom line is that Cog Service is able to detect sentiment. Maybe you're using text analytics to process support tickets from customers or just customer feedback or survey results. I want you to think about these Cog services, as I said before, as REST API endpoints that you can just tap into and plug them into your applications. And they certainly are combinable. You can absolutely mix and match them if you want layered functionality in what you're doing. But text analytics, for example, would be able to give you a readout on what Cog Services thinks, and you then can take action. If there's any feedback from customers that has a negative sentiment, you definitely would probably want to want to triage that above some of the others. You see what I mean? The translator service, gosh, when you combine a service like translator with another Cog Services speech, you have the possibility of taking your entire website and localizing it to multiple languages just like that almost. The ability to take text to speech and speech to text. I've seen business meetings being captured, having the audio from business meetings captured. And some of these Cog services actually allow you to customize the behavior. So you can train the speech Cog service to recognize people. And I'm not talking celebrities. I'm talking you could create models for your own peers, your managers, whomever. And that way, when you're doing a transcript, say, of an audio file, you can have the Cog service report who's speaking at which time zone or time code as well. And 90 supported languages. Again, this speaks to the fact that, you probably know that Microsoft has historically been a dog fooding company where they use their own products every day. Same thing with these cognitive services. In fact, over the last few years, since I've gotten deeper and deeper into Azure, I see how true that is, and that how sometimes there's internal only products that eventually get to be so mature, Microsoft decides to offer them to the world. Think of log analytics and what originally was called Data Explorer. Speech, as I mentioned, you've got two-way speech to text, text to speech. You can create audiobooks if you want. I'm a huge audiobook fan, so I love that. Speaker recognition, speech translation. And then the biggest and most mature category are the vision APIs. And here is an example, what you can see at the top of the slide here, computer vision and custom vision, where computer vision can take a look at images and videos and do object detection, can look for landmarks and celebrities and this kind of stuff. Custom vision would allow you to do things like have the service recognize your company logo. Maybe your company logo isn't as ubiquitous as Pepsi. Now, computer vision, I'm sure, would be able to detect Coke and Pepsi. But if you're an up-and-coming beverage maker, let's say, and you still want to be able to have the service detect your particular logo, you see, there's an example of something you can do with custom vision. So in short, these cognitive services are pre-baked APIs. Some allow you some customization that you can just tap into and pay as part of your Azure subscription. Face is where you can actually include biometric authentication. As a matter of fact, Windows Hello, the facial biometric auth service, uses the Face API. That's where you can train the service to recognize maybe your staff members, such that if your marketing department is going through, hundreds, thousands of conference pictures, it can quickly sort out if there's a staff member or somebody in those images as well. And Video Form Recognizer allows you to take, say, PDFs that have tables and scanned receipt images and turn that into actionable text. It's a bit more robust than just an OCR. It actually can preserve the tabular or the form layout there. And Video Indexer is cool because it's optimized for video, of course, and that's where you can look at sentiment in moving images rather than in still images. And it can do people recognition and sentiment analysis and all of that. So given that as our background, I hope I whet your appetite. Let's switch over into demo and we'll get you right started being productive with this. I'm going to assume two things. I'm going to assume that you've got an Azure subscription and that you're signed in with appropriate permissions. I'm signed in as an owner, so I'm good to go. I will say, check this out. In the Azure portal, if you do a search for free, you got free services. And you might know that you can redeem a free account once and you get $100 USD or your equivalent to spend over 30 days. And then some services are free for 12 months, just like Amazon. And what I've noticed a while back is that a lot of those COG services are in here. So even if you're still on a trial and you figured, well, I already burned through my 30 days, so that the trial is just sitting there doing nothing, you can still tap into these cognitive services for 12 calendar months. And they're pretty generous. I mean, look at computer vision, 5,000 transactions per month. See, 30,000 face transactions. Now that might not be as high as you might initially think, because there's more to that. You have to do quite a few transactions in the face API when you're training a new model. But anyway, I wanted to mention that. Now let me get you over what, for me anyway, was an initial hurdle in installing or activating cognitive services. And let me explain what I mean by that. If you do a search in the Azure Marketplace for cognitive services, you'll see this, what's called the shared service. Fine. This has an advantage in that there's a whole bunch of the COG services, not all, but most of the COG services are accessible within this shared service resource. So if your team is going to be consuming more than one COG service and you want to centralize billing, this is definitely, in my opinion, the preferred way to go, because you've got a single endpoint and a single set of API keys to share across all those services. Now, if I step back and look for a particular service, you'll also find that many of the COG services are available singly as well. For example, you can see Face, and I tell you if you want to look up Translator, it's in there. So this is a hazard in terms of don't wind up paying twice. You know, you might have a shared COG services resource and a Face. Is that really what you want? What I like to advise is if your teams aren't going to consume more than just the one service, at least for the time being, or they need their own cost accounting, I guess in that case it might be okay to do a singleton, like a single service instance. But what I've done before session is I created an instance of the cognitive shared services. So let's go over there right now and let's tap in there. I called it TW Omaha COG in honor of the Omaha Azure user group. And as you can see on the quick start, this is pretty nicely done. I really love that. I refer to this quite a bit because you'll find on the quick start blade, you get a run of all of the cognitive services that are included in the shared resource. And like I said, all of the core ones are there: computer vision, face, form recognizer, speech, text analytics, translator. It's all there, which is nice. Next thing we'll want to do is go to keys and endpoint. This is going to give us the API endpoint, which takes the form HTTPS service name, in my case twomahacog.cognitiveservices.azure.com, and that's what I'll use as my base URL for all my calls into the service. And the location, you want to make a note of that. This is a regional service. And then you'll want either of the API keys. Now notice that there's regenerate up here, so this brings up the standard caveats of being really careful about those keys, where you're putting them in plain text or otherwise, and considering having as part of your regular security hygiene, regenerating those keys. Because if somebody has your endpoint and their key, there's nothing at all stopping them from making however many calls into the service that they want to. Now, it's been on my to-do list for a long time. I hope I'll remember to do it tonight or tomorrow. But a lot of times, like with storage accounts, for example, you can store your keys in Key Vault and instruct Key Vault to regenerate them. And I want to write it down here, but I don't want to mess up my screen share. Keep forgetting. I'm pretty sure we can do that same thing with cognitive services. I'm sure we'd have to do it programmatically, say with Azure PowerShell or the Azure CLI. It does say it right here that you can use Key Vault, so I guess it is possible, and I just offer that as a suggestion. Lastly, we've got the pricing tier. It looks like for the shared service, there's just S0 at this time. I normally don't focus on pricing, but it's always useful to look at. Now notice that they're just mentioning 4 of the services, and they're saying that $1 starting USD per 1,000 calls. So I think Microsoft has made an intentional choice, perhaps to try to keep generating buzz and increasing audience at pricing these COG services pretty compellingly, it seems to me. Okay, as I said, I like to demo these by using the REST API nakedly, because then whether you use Python or PowerShell or a .NET language or Node, you can just either form the calls yourself in the language, or you can download the SDKs, the Cognitive Services Libraries, and make use of it for there. And I definitely want to give a shout out to the Microsoft docs for being so thorough in terms of especially things like quick start tutorials and that kind of stuff. I also want to say that if we go to the Cognitive Services homepage, over at azure.com, and then if you scroll down to where they initially describe the services, which is where I got the screen captures from earlier, let me go down to Vision. When you click into a service, Microsoft is, besides the marketing stuff that you would expect, they put an embedded application to give you a good idea of impact right off the top, which I think is pretty cool. So in this case, this is the Computer Vision API. You can either use your own image or put a URL to it, or you can choose one of these sample images. And then you can see over on the right the raw JSON that comes back from the service. And then you can see that where the computer vision has recognized entities, it's created what's called a bounding box. So what I want to give you a heads up on is you probably would expect that the results would come back in JSON. A common pattern you'll see is that when there's an identification of some type, you're going to see these coordinates, X, Y, W, and H, to let you know the bounding box coordinates for that object. And then other than that, it's going to be a question of consulting the docs to figure out exactly what's going on. Here's a case where downloading the session files is going to help you save some clicks, because I'm telling you what, I often find if I do a Google search for like cognitive services docs, not that the docs are bad, they never are, of course, but it can be hard. I've found it to be hard to get to the raw API definitions of the different services. I mean, even if you get down to the article level, like here, if we go to the Computer Vision docs page, you have to click again to get into the library. And then over here on the left, when you get past all of the conceptual stuff and the tutorials, maybe if you're lucky, under resources, there'll be a link to the actual API definition, but I've had a hard time finding it. I just don't know what's up with that. So I've done some Googling. I have a black belt in Google Foo. Not that it's necessarily that tough to find. But the site that you'll want to bookmark, if I can get my darn mouse pointer back here, hang on. There we go, COG Services API reference. Yes, this is it. The DNS name is going to be region, so in my case it's eastus.dev.cognitive.microsoft.com, and then /docs/services. This is the best resource I found if you're just looking for the facts. You don't want tutorials, you don't want full explanations. Just give me what I need to form the requests to consume the service. And so this is an alphabetized list of them all, so I'll just simply do a search for computer vision. And then it's going to be a case of choosing your API version, because as you would expect, just like any software, it's periodically versioned. It looks like we've got version 1, version 2, version 2.1, version 3, and then we see preview. Of course, the standard disclaimers apply when it comes to pre-release features. The fact that, and you can look up the Azure Preview Terms of Use. There's no warranty, SLA, support unless the engineering team otherwise tells you. All right, so let me scroll up to the latest release version of the API, and let me make sure you understand how to read this. And again, I mean no offense if this is already in your wheelhouse and you know this already. I just try to be as well-rounded an instructor as I can. This is uses what's called an open API format, formerly called Swagger, where we can see the different HTTP methods that are each aligned with an operation exposed by the API. So the first one here is a post, which a lot of these are, is analyze image. And we can see after Azure tells us which regions the API is available in, it gives us a terse description of what it does. This extracts a rich set of visual features based on the image content. Okay, fine. And then we can scroll down a little bit more. We get to what I think is the most important stuff, the actual way to form the request. And you see the request URL is going to be your base endpoint, in our case, the Cognitive Services Shared endpoint, /vision/version number, and then your operation. And then as query parameters, if there's any optional stuff we want to get, this is where these docs are absolutely worth their weight in gold, because we can see, for example, we can bring in visual features as an optional parameter and say, look for adult-oriented stuff, look for well-known brands, categorize the image, just don't need to read it, but you go on from there, okay? So we've got all of our parameters. Almost always as a pattern, you'll find that the request headers are the same when you're calling the cognitive services. You're going to need a content type. That's going to be the media type that you're sending. It could, if it's JSON, it'll be application JSON. If it's an image, it'll be image PNG or whatever. And then you need OCP APIM subscription key. And that's simply your shared services or your service-specific API key. You can use either key 1 or key 2. And then the rest of the docs article just goes to describe what a typical response would be and if there's errors and that kind of stuff. So you can use that pattern to keep you in really good stead of quickly figuring out specifically what you need to call the API. Let me pause right now. Any questions, comments, concerns, curiosities at this point?
I don't see anything on the chat. And if anyone has anything, feel free to unmute yourself and you can ask them.
Yeah. Now, one thing I forgot to add to the course files is my Postman files. I like to use Postman simply because it's a nice, easy way to keep all my requests together. You can get a Postman account for free. You don't have to have a paid account. It's available as desktop app, mobile app. It's in browser. Again, you may be familiar with it. And what I've done is created a number of collections here that cover different services. And again, I'm happy to add that. Probably instead of trying to horse around with the download link I gave you, you might just want to go to my GitHub. If you go to my website, techtrainertim.com, you'll find a link to my GitHub. And if you look in there for something like AI 100 or AI 900, those are the two Microsoft Azure AI exams, I've got my collections in there for when I teach the class as a full day or 2-day thing. But anyway, what I've got here is I actually start from Azure REST just to get a feel for this, to take a look at what's going on here. I mean, the fact you can do anything in Azure directly by calling the API directly. And this has some similarities with some cognitive services. Most of the cog services you can just call and you'll get a response. In some cases, you have to do multiple requests. Like let's say you wanted to get a list of your resource groups in your subscription via the REST API. Looks like we're first having to do a post call to get an AAD token. So it looks like we've got login, microsoftonline.com, your subscription ID, OAuth2 token. And then in the headers portion, I'm specifying just what data it's expecting. And for body, there's a little bit more that's required. I've created a service principal in Azure Active Directory, and I've placed the client ID and the secret in there and so on and so forth. And then I'm creating a variable out of the bearer token after it finishes. This is another reason why Postman is just so useful. You can just do all of your API exploration and development work all within one spot. And by the way, no, I don't have any affiliate relationship with Postman. I'm a paid customer. So once I get that back, it comes back as a variable. In this tests pane, I'm creating a global variable called bearer token. And now if I want to call resource groups, I can do a get against the subscription. And notice my authorization field is going to bring in that bearer token. When you create a variable in Postman, you call it with double curly braces. So now I come back with my list of subscriptions. And again, I just have an example. We're not going to do this one, but you can deploy an ARM template here. I think in this example, yeah, I did a template link out to one of the Azure Quick Start. But the idea is once you have your token, then you're ready to take off and fly. Okay, so why don't we now take a look at our first cognitive service, computer vision. And I've brought in some of the most common operations here, and ones that you definitely could get some time-saving benefit on. For example, I always think of marketing departments. Maybe they're aggregating a whole bunch of images and they need thumbnail versions. Maybe they're populating an online product catalog, for example. Are they going to sit there and snag it or whatever their tool is? I hope not. So we've got the get thumbnail operation. And the post request, as you can see, I got from the documentation. I created a global variable here. In Postman, you can store your variables. I've had a hard time showing my variables lately. I don't know. I just think this is a bug in the latest version of Postman. I can't get them to show here, but I've created that. There you go. The TW Omaha cog URL, I'm putting that in as a variable for ease of reuse. And here we're going through Vision 3.1 generate thumbnail. And then for my parameters, I'm specifying a width of 128 and a height of 128. There's another optional parameter called smart cropping. And then in the header area, as I mentioned before, you'll want your API key, and I created a Postman variable for that. And then the content type, whatever it is. So I'm specifying a JPEG. So if we go to body, we finally can determine how are we going to format the data that we want the service to operate on. And we could do it in a couple different ways. I've got it set to binary. And notice Postman allows you to do a direct upload. Obviously, that's not going to work on the web, but it'll work here just fine. Let me grab, why don't we get a thumbnail of this landmark01.jpg. And then once we're ready, we can send the request into the service, and now we've got our thumbnail. Anybody recognize that building? No?
And
When I was yeah, exactly. And thank you for saying it the way that I would too. As a boy, I always was told.
Not the new name.
Not the Willis Tower, exactly, right. So let me save the changes, come out of here. Analyze image, describe image. This is kind of fun. Describe and analyze, if you look in the docs, they separate them a bit, because at first blush you think, well, aren't they going to do the same thing? They're going to take an image as input and give you various kinds of recognition depending upon what it is. Well, one gives you more verbose responses. Let's try analyze image. So here I'm saying JPEG. Let me go to body. Celebrity. Okay, yeah, that's one of the things you can do with the analyze image operation. I almost forgot about that. One of the optional parameters is details, and you can set that to celebrities to look for well-known people or landmarks. And actually, we'll run it next against that Sears Tower and see what it says. But right now, it looks like it's set for celebrities. And you also can turn on language detection and visual features, looking particularly at faces and that kind of stuff. Well, I happen to have a celebrity image, so let me browse to my practice files again. I'm trying to structure these files so they don't give any hints away. So in the EXIF data or in the title, or the file name rather, there's nothing to let us know who that celebrity is. That is a JPEG, so let's verify that the content type is set correctly. Yep, it is. So let's send that response and that request rather into the server, and we get our categories. Now, you'll notice here that COG Services, when it reports back to you, it's going to give you a confidence score that ranges between 0, which is 0% confident of its prediction, and 1.0, which is 100%. In this case, it came back with just a bit above 50% for people portrait. I'm a little bit surprised. However, it appears to have recognized Philip Seymour Hoffman with 99.98%. And just for our sanity's sake, we can jump into the sample files and verify one of my favorite actors from a great movie, The Master, if you've never seen it. All right, so now let's come back to parameters. Adjust my view here. I'll turn off visual features and let's do a landmark detection now. Landmarks. And now let's bring in that landmark image. Where are you? Landmark 1, there we go. And that is also a JPEG, so we're sorted there, okay. Click send. Yeah, so it's a building, 71%, and check it out. Willis Tower, which is the new name of what used to be the Sears Tower. Now, what are some patterns in the real world here? Well, one pattern is you and your team, if you're not already good at parsing JSON, you're going to become great at it because the results are coming back this way. But you probably know one of the wonderful things about JSON is that it's pretty darn straightforward to parse. So you can pluck out whatever depth element or elements that you need from that output and then put it into your application or put it into a database or whatever the heck it is that you need to do with that data. But here we're seeing some of the capabilities pop out here. What about describe image? What's that one all about here? Parameters, we've got language, max candidates, the number of descriptions we want. Headers, again, we've got our key, but that's not set correctly, is it? So let me bring out my key. What did I name it? Is it called key? Yeah. And then content type is ping. Okay, what do I want to do here? Let me do something a little bit different. What if we were going to, instead of doing local testing, which isn't very real world, we're going to have it go against a URL. In that case, we can simply change the content type. I'll want to change it from image ping to application JSON. And then for our body, we can do raw JSON. And then the format that it's looking for here is URL and then some URL. Now I've got a headshot image on my website. I think I remember the path. Let me try it. timwarnertech.com, images, headshot.png. Let's see if that works. Okay, so we've got our key, our JSON. Looks like we're ready to fly. Image URL is not accessible. Okay, well, before I give up, let me try that one more time. Tech Trainer Tim, images. Oh, maybe I put the wrong, yeah, there's the image. But what did I do wrong? Come on, Mac. Give me back my desktop. Maybe I did the path wrong. Let's go back to bot. Yeah, I did. It's not Tim Warner Tech. It's techtrainertim.com. Send that in. There we go. So again, depending upon what you're asking the API with those optional parameters, you get greater or less than number of results back. Here are some ideas that could be useful. Your social media team is probably always looking for keywords and search engine optimization. These COG services can be great as far as generating, they're not particularly innovative. I mean, person, man, glasses, whatever, but you can act on these results. You could have code that separates content based on the appearance of tags, for an example. In terms of things like object detection and custom vision, you may want to train the service to detect your competitors' logos such that you can send batch media to the service and separate images that mention or show your competitor's logo. You probably wouldn't want to surface that in a brochure, you know what I mean? That kind of stuff. Now, I have to confess on a personal note that this really freaked me out when I saw that the service recognized me by name. And the reason I learned why this is the case, it's because anybody who speaks at an Ignite conference gets dumped into their data set and they train the models to recognize their speakers. So that's why it's able to recognize me. But a little disconcertingly, the service is only 52% confident that it is in fact me. All right, so what do we have here? Detect objects. What's that one doing? Well, we'd have to look in the docs to see exactly, but why don't we throw a file at it and see what happens here? So let's see. I have an image. Let me go to body called product placement. Yeah, the one that was there. That's just got a whole bunch of different brand logos and objects. And we can take a quick look at it in the background here. Let's see, product placement.ping. Yeah, so this is showing, obviously, fast foods and all of this kind of stuff. What can the service give us right out of the box here in terms of object detection? Maybe a lot, maybe a little. We'll find out. Okay, so this is a ping file. Looks like we're good. It looks like we have to adjust our subscription key. So I can bring in that variable again. So it's giving us bounding boxes. It's telling us it sees a person, person. Well, that's not a whole lot of info. So this kind of brings up a couple learning lessons with the cognitive services, that there's going to be some experimentation and iteration for you. I can almost guarantee it. You'll find that as you start to use more of these cog services, you do find some overlap from time to time. For example, computer vision does have a lot of people or face detection, at least if it's a celebrity, whereas the face API is about face recognition, but your faces that you want to train on specifically. So that's one pattern you'll see, that there's sometimes a bit of overlap, and I think what's at play there is the fact that there's different engineering teams that work on these different APIs, and I know it from my own experience. Sometimes you wind up reinventing the wheel and wind up overlapping. As a matter of fact, I've seen just over the last couple years some reshuffling of the cognitive services. For example, on that main cognitive services page that we looked at originally, there used to be a whole bunch of Bing APIs in there. I don't know if we can get all the way back there. Yeah, something like this. But they've been shipped out. I don't even know where those Bing APIs are considered now, but it looks like they're no longer in the core cognitive services family. The Bing APIs allow you to use the Bing search engine in your application. So you could do something like, I don't know, you know how when you're reading a Kindle, you can just hover or long tap on a word to get a dictionary definition? You can tap into the Bing APIs to get pronunciations, definitions, articles, images. All of the services in Bing is what I'm talking about. So they used to be in COG services. Now they're under some other umbrella for whatever reason. So take that as you will. Questions, comments, concerns, anything pop up in the last several minutes?
No, Tim.
Okay. Now, if you're interested in training up your own people, let's say that you work for a law firm, let's say, and you've got a whole bunch of partners and associates and staff and support people, and you want to be able for the service to recognize these faces by face. This would be a case for the face API. And we don't have time to go through every step, so I'm going to summarize it. What you do, the high-level workflow here, is you create one or more what are called person groups. And each person group, it depends on which tier. The Face API has a couple pricing tiers. It's something like 1,000 or 10,000. You can find it in the docs, but there's two types of person group. There's the person group and the large person group, depending upon how many face identities you plan to add. So that you can look at the person group as a container. And that's actually a search scope too. So chances are, unless you've got a really big enterprise going, you'll be fine with just a single person group, because that'll make the service work much faster when it comes to facial detection, because it's going to be scoped to the person group, okay? So you create that container, and you can do create, read, update, and delete operations, as you see. And then you create person identities for each person that you want their face in the database. And this is just these operations, this create person, that's just going to create a GUID and a name and an association with the person group. It's not anything to do with training yet. It's just essentially like a primary key record for each person or each face that's going to be in the person group. And then once you do that, then it's going to be training, person face operation. And the more person face images you supply, the more robust the model will be at doing facial detection. Maybe you just had professional headshots done and you've got one for each, or maybe you're fortunate enough to have more than one candidate image. But, you know, again, you can go into the documentation to learn more about that. But those faces get linked to the face ID, and the face ID is linked to the person group. And then you've got, once you've associated and uploaded the persons, you've got some training to do. This, as I mentioned at the beginning of the session, you're building an ML model. You're taking source data, mathematical algorithms, and eventually being able to make predictable results based on that combination. And then, of course, you've got facial identification and facial detection and facial verification options. So that's just the, the skyscraper view of how you might work with the Face API. And because that's quite a few operations, not that you would do every one for every phase, this is why that 30,000 transaction free tier may not be as generous as it might seem at the outset. Okay. What else do we have in here? Form recognizer? Yeah, this is pretty compelling. I mean, maybe it was more compelling a few years ago. For example, on my mobile phone, I've got a couple apps, you probably do too, that allow you to scan a receipt and even take the text off the receipt. That's kind of what we're talking about here. Notice that there's an analyze receipt and get analyze receipt result. So this is an example of one of the COG services that's multi-step as opposed to single step. If you want to analyze a receipt, and by the way, that receipt can combine both printed text and numbers as well as handwriting. In fact, I kind of skipped over that, but computer vision has an OCR, an optical character recognition. Actually, let's just do this because this is kind of cool. To jump back to computer vision for a second, let's say you've got field salespeople or whoever, and they've taken pictures of signs, billboards, whatever, that you want to take action on. Well, how can you take action on a static image of a billboard? Well, this might be an option for addressing that issue, the OCR operation of computer vision. So I've got a couple OCR test images in the course files that I shared with you. One that's pretty clean, another one that has some background shading to try to challenge the cognitive service a little bit more. Let's see here. Content type is not JPEG here, it's PNG. So let me update this content type. And again, I've got a mess up here with my subscription key. I can easily fix that. And then for parameters, this is pretty important, it seems to me. If you're going to do some optical character recognition, you want to specify the target language. You then, though, to speak to my earlier point, there's nothing stopping you from doing an OCR into English, let's say, and then calling the text analytics or translator services to do a language translation into any number of additional languages. You see what I mean? And detect orientation, portrait versus landscape, upside down versus right side up, that kind of thing. All right, so let's see. Let's save, send. Let's bring this up. So it detected English, that's right. No text angle, up orientation. Okay, now the results here from the OCR might be a little not what you expect. At least I found that to be the case. This is a case where you're going to have to do some slicing and dicing and parsing of the JSON, because as you see, each line has a bounding box around it, and each word has a bounding box. So you're going to need to parse every text element and maybe add artificially a space. And I don't know how you'd resolve paragraph returns, but it's a little bit ugly, unfortunately, but you get your text back in this tree format. There's probably a way to optimize that I'm not aware of. So to look at the source file, just for comparison purposes, the OCR test clean, this is the original source text that it parsed. And just for grins, we don't have to do it, but the other one, the noisy, shows how you can try to complicate things a little bit, because not only in the foreground do we have those bubbles kind of interrupting, in a way, the foreground text, but we also have different lightness levels, if that's the term, in terms of, do you want to bring in these title bars of these windows? Then you've got this console view. What will be picked up? I can tell you it'll all get picked up, but it may not come back in just the correct order, which speaks to my theme about this not necessarily being, you're in and out and you're done and everybody's happy. You may have to do a little bit of cleanup on the back end after you get the results back from the service. All right, Areno. So to return to analyze receipt, if we come down here under form recognizer, first we're going to post to do an analysis operation. So let me do a file selection, and I've got a receipt in here that does combine, let's take a look at it, both, it's from Contoso, it's a Microsoft practice file. It's got the printed elements that we want to get from our expense report or whatever, And then down at the bottom, we've got $1.63 and $14 and something handwriting. So this is a good way for the COG services to flex its muscles with handwriting recognition as well as print OCR. So let me, I think I've selected that here. It's JPEG. Yep, looks good. Let me update my key again. Go to parameters, include text details. I've got that set to true. Good. So our endpoint is endpoint, form recognizer, version, pre-built receipt, analyze, and then I've got my include text details. All right, so this, you can see it's kind of small, but instead of getting a 200 OK from the server, we've gotten 202 accepted. This, as I said, could be a longer running operation depending upon how complex the receipt is. So there's an analysis step. And as in this analysis, eventually the service will give us back a GUID identifier for this job. And then we can pass that into this GET request to get the analyzed receipt result. And we put that right on the request line here. So endpoint form recognizer 2 pre-built receipt analyze results / and then that GUID. So once we've got the GUID, we'll be ready to rock. Let me go back to analyze receipt and see if it's shown up yet. Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, it's this request ID. So let me just paste that to my clipboard. We'll go to get receipt results and just carefully pop this in here. Hit send. Okay, authentication problem. Well, yes, indeed. Try that again. Okay. So we got a 200 back here. And if we get our data back, again, there's Contoso with bounding box properties. We've got another Contoso. Eventually, there's our address. So again, it might be a little bit challenging to parse that into human readable. Let me quickly figure out what we're looking for with $14.63. So let's see if the $1.63 comes out in the results here. Let me do a 1.63. There it is. So it was able to successfully grab both the handwritten text as well as the printed text. Okay. All right. Analyze form or biz card layout. That's something else that the form recognizer service can do. Analyze just a business card. And again, that's a two-step process, as you can see here. So hopefully those demos are a good starting point. Let me show you another pattern that you'll see among the COG services. Whereas they're all REST APIs, and at that level they behave quite similarly, some of the COG services have separate portals, have separate web portals to extend on the raw API. For example, if we go down to Video Indexer, if you go to videoindexer.ai, you can sign in with your Azure AD account. And Microsoft created this as a team-based interface for you to either programmatically upload videos to the service, or in this web portal, you can actually do a manual upload. And you can surface various levels of intelligence from that content. Now, what's neat about the Video Indexer portal is that you can look at some samples here from Microsoft just to get a quick fix on what's going. Let's grab this Microsoft Build 2016 video just to show you some of the capabilities that jump right out here. Let me pause this because I don't want it running. You know who that is, right? All right, so look here. We've got integration with the Face API and the Computer Vision API right out of the box. And also, if you go into settings, you can create model customizations to help it recognize your people. Because again, maybe you have your own internal conferences that you want the video indexer to be able to create a timeline for and have it recognize who the speakers are and who the questioners are and that stuff. So you have the ability to do that customization directly in the service. These are already people in the Microsoft database, so it's pretty easy. And notice that it recognizes the people. What percentage of the time are they in the video? What are some keywords that have come out through the audio track of the video that may be useful? And notice that when you select these keywords, you can jump to direct time codes where that shows up, that's high impact. I mean, for what I do in technical training, that is super high impact. Being able to detect between a speaking section and a demo section and a technical presentation is another example. And the timeline, as you see here, is giving you closed caption support with time codes. Isn't that neat? So that's the video indexer portal. And like I said, there's some other ones here. Content moderator would be another one. That's contentmoderatorprod.b2clogin.com. And as you see, it's a different kind of a sign-in page. This speaks to the different engineering groups here. I'm going to sign in with my Azure. Yes.
Just a quick question. Is this video indexer service probably the same thing that's used by Stream in the Office 365 services?
I don't know for 100% sure, but
Okay.
I would think so, given the similarity of the output, yes.
Yeah, because in the Stream outputs, the transcripts, you start getting not people, but indexing of who is there and your whole meeting. So seems very likely.
Yes, I agree. Isn't that cool that we can now benefit from those tools in our own videos? I love that. I think we just have time for this, maybe one more. I see we're already a little bit past 7 p.m. Central Time. The content moderator, again, please don't think that you have to use the web dashboard. You can always use an SDK or the raw API. But this is pretty helpful, like I mentioned earlier, because it's team-based. The idea is that you can create teams and you can create your own disposition tags, maybe competitor or, whatever it might be. There's a couple built-in tags that Azure uses itself, but this is really meant for you and your team to create your own taxonomy for labeling content. And we can test it out right here under Try. We can look at images, text, and video just to get a feel for it. And the way the workflow is, programmatically, or you can just do it through this web portal. You're going to submit image, text, or video input to the content moderator. No, I want to use a sample, so let me go to sample images. Oh, seriously? Is it going to make me extract them? Oh my, I don't remember that being the case, but okay, whatever. So let me quickly grab sample1.jpg and come back to the browser. And let's bring up that file, sample one. Okay, some kids jumping in a lake. All right, well done. You've successfully submitted. Click here to review. Okay, so the two tags that the content moderator uses itself are adult and racy. And it looks like it's tagged this as racy, maybe because of the swimsuits. But notice that each of those has a confidence, just like we saw before. So it's a 0.83% racy score, 0.1% adult score. And you as a team can disregard, untick, you can clear the tags that Azure has provided. But as I said, as you add your own tags, you can train the content moderator to incorporate those. So you might have a tag that flags on whenever a competitor's logo is shown or something, and it's a nice way to get a classification right off the top. So that's an example of that. One more example, let's go to text. And there's some sample text here, that has some questionable language, some personally identifiable information in it. And again, programmatically, you can send this data from wherever into the service, and then it'll come back on its own. It's capable of this level of analysis, but then you can come in and you can customize that to a degree. So it looks like it's flagged some elements here. It's hard to read here. Text has profanity is true. Text, a detected email, a detected phone number, has PII, has matched terms, and A and R are not applicable here. But again, you see the idea. This could be a big saver in terms of security compliance. Just turning a whole bunch of text onto the service to get a quick heads up on whether you do have sensitive or personally identifiable information in there or whatnot. Lastly, down here at the bottom, Lewis and Q&A Maker, these speak to the conversational AI services, the so-called chatbots that you can do in Azure. And that's also related to the Power Platform, if you're familiar with the Power Virtual Agent. It's all using the Azure Bot Service under the hood. The fact that, just as a heads up, you can absolutely integrate any of these cognitive services in your chat solutions as well, just as you could any of your solutions. So in summary, let me go to I've got some heads up here in terms of if you are interested in certifying. At the moment, there's 2 AI certs in the Azure portfolio. AI 900 is for beginners, it's the fundamentals. And then the associate one is AI 102. Heads up on that, the previous version of the exam, AI 100, is going to be around until June 30th, and then after June 30th, it's going to be AI 102. Also heads up, AI 102 takes the subject matter much more in a development direction. So if you were considering getting that certification, I would hustle to do it before the 30th of June, because the 100 exam is much more operational and architectural than the 102. All right, cool. So in summary, the value proposition that Cognitive Services has for us is why expend the time, money, effort to train your own ML models when you can consume these services and even customize them to a degree for your use. In so doing, we're able to add value to your applications pretty quickly and pretty compellingly, in my humble opinion. Again, the resources are at timw.info/cog1. My Twitter is TechTrainerTim. As Vaibhav mentioned, I post on there pretty much every day. About 90% business. I don't do much personal stuff at all on there, so I post on all this stuff. And on the web, I'm techtrainertim.com. Well, there you have it. Any questions, comments, concerns, let me know. Hit me up. What you got?
Awesome. I don't see anything on the chat, so if anyone has any questions, any comments, and if you want to discuss anything with Tim, feel free to unmute yourself now.
So, Tim, I got a question for you on Form Recognizer.
Yeah.
So, working with, I don't know if you've had a chance to work with it with a set of documents where you have a minimal set of documents, like 1 or 2. I know in the documentation they suggest around 5 or more to get a real good accuracy for the document. But have you worked on any projects, or you have any experience working on something where there's only like 1 revision of the document each time? But say like the company has a set of specification sheets, and for each product it's different, but it's the same information in different formats, and you might only get a revision every 2 years or something. I haven't
idea? Crossed that particular bridge.
Yeah.
But what I'm thinking, unfortunately, I hope I'm wrong, but I suspect I'm correct on this, that here we're bumping against the trade-off of really, the COG services are software as a service. They're considered to be ML models as a service, and it may be a case where you're bumping into that. Unless Form Recognizer has some way for you to do a little bit of customization and training, it may be this is its best effort. Is that what you found in practice?
Yeah, there's a custom piece for it where you can pin in certain field areas and stuff, and that works great until they change the form on you and you have to repin, and then it becomes more of a labeling exercise versus a recognition exercise. But okay, I was just curious. That was.
Anyone else has anything to ask Tim? I guess not. With that, on behalf of the user group, Tim, I would like to thank you once again for taking time out. It was a great session. I hope everyone enjoyed it. And this session was recorded. I'm going to stop the recording in a moment, and the recording will be available on our YouTube channel. And Tim, once again, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Vaibhav. Glad to be with everybody. Take good